Jeroboam's withered hand. How did I miss this? Hello, everyone. My name is Al Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church or in the comments below if you like. If you like this video, share, pass it on to somebody else. YouTube may recommend it on to someone else yet again, but who knows? Well, I'm taking a bit of a departure from our regular study this week for a particular reason. It's just human frailty. In my reading, my regular reading, I just came to 1 Kings 13, and for some reason, a passage that I had read several times finally jumped off the page at me. I need to do something here. I got a flicker going on this screen here, just irritating me there. And it jumped off the page, and I have read this passage and kind of not paid attention to it. This time, however, I don't know how many times I've read through this. Probably because I'm looking at the bit below it, which is also very interesting. Read 1 Kings 13, you'll see it's a wonderful, interesting thing going on there. But anyways, this little element just caught me. And I thought, I've got to figure out what's going on. I've got to do some more reading. I've got to make some connections. And it took all week. I just kept on going back to it and back to it and back to it. And there you go. So I didn't get to my other preparation. I'm not even sure what I'm going to do tomorrow because I'm unprepared. I might even do this topic on Sunday morning, just with an apology. I just got caught in a rabbit hole. Well, what's the story? Well, after the death of Solomon, Israel divided into the northern and the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom was ruled by Jeroboam, the southern by Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son. And both kings were wicked. Rehoboam appears as quite a weak man. Jeroboam as a strong but evil man, although you're not sure if you read them, you might come to a different judgment. Jeroboam, however, wanted to separate the house of David as much as possible from Jerusalem and so on. And he was an evil king. He set up cast golden calves, or a golden calf and a golden cow. And he put them in two different places in the northern kingdom. The farthest one was in Dan, which is a long journey. That became the main temple. And so this was evil. Also, what he did was instituted a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, because the 15th day of the 7th month is Feast of Tabernacles. Of course, it's the dominant end of year religious celebration. But he instituted a feast that came a month later, and thought that he could offer sacrifices, led the people astray. A lot of evil came from this. You can read about the evil of Jeroboam and what he did in 1 Kings chapter 12. If you don't know this story, maybe read 1 Kings chapter 12 and 1 Kings chapter 13. Not a long read, and you kind of get what's going on. And remember, the chapter definitions probably shouldn't have happened here. This is one of those places where, whoa, you shouldn't have divided the chapters. However, let's go on. So Rehoboam also instituted a priesthood from the common people, not from the Levites. And these were, of course, well and truly involved in dragging the people away from Yahweh. And this was terrible. Now, as the story goes, we have this setting, and then 1 Kings chapter 13 opens. So I will slide this across here. Let's just see everything's working here. Yeah, I'm going to slide this across to the main screen and just read this with you. I do like to read some of these because we sometimes just miss the context. So this is 1 Kings chapter 13, just the opening words here. And behold, God came out of Judah by the word of the Lord to Bethel. Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make offerings. And the man cried against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who make offerings on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is the sign that the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out. And when the king heard the saying of the man of God, which he cried out against the altar at Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, Seize him. And his hand, which he stretched out against him, dried up, so that he could not draw it back to himself. The altar was also torn down, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. And the king said to the man of God, Entreat now the favor of the Lord your God, and pray for me that my hand may be restored to me. And the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him, and became as it was before. And the king said to the man of God, Come home with me and refresh yourself, and I will give you a reward. And the man of God said to the king, if you give me half your house, I will not go in with you. I will not eat bread or drink water in this place, for so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, ye shall neither eat bread nor drink water, nor return by the way that you came. So he went another way, and did not return by the way that he came to Bethel. So what an interesting passage. So fascinating. And it leads to another equally interesting story after that. But we'll just stop right here. So Jeroboam is going to sacrifice on the altar, and a man of God that is not called a prophet by anyone except the backslidden older prophet later, but he's just called a man of God everywhere. So maybe he was a prophet, maybe a priest who God spoke to. It's a little hard to say. But a man of God has the word of the Lord, and he says to Jeroboam, listen, this altar is going to be destroyed. Actually speaks to the altar. The altar will be destroyed. Human bones will be burned on it, and so on. So Jeroboam reaches out his hand to either to seize the prophet or to make a declaration against him, or the man of God, I should say. His hand withers. And immediately Jeroboam is scared, and he who is the bringer of false gods into the nation, which is so fascinating, says, pray to the Lord your God that he will heal me. Now, listen to the hardness of heart at work in Jeroboam here. Your God did this, maybe your God will heal me. And the man of God prays, and God restores his hand. At the same time, God also destroys the altar, breaks it apart. So there's an earthquake, or there's some event that takes place here. A really fascinating thing going on. Now, this is a great look into the darkness of the human heart that's rebellious. It's very, very interesting. Even though a miracle is worked on Jeroboam's behalf, even though he sees this mighty thing going on, this word from the Lord comes, he still, in the presence of all of this, continues with his wickedness. This is just such an interesting commentary on human nature. Now, in the passage also, the man of God prophesies a coming king whose name is Josiah, and what Josiah will do. This is the intriguing bit. This, I guess, is the bit that caught me this time that hadn't before. There are only a few cases in the Bible where someone is mentioned by name well in advance. Samson, Cyrus, Josiah. And this was, he mentioned Josiah 300 or so years before Josiah turns up, which is really fascinating. Now, Josiah was one of the greatest kings that Israel ever had. He was responsible for many reforms. There are two kings in Israel's history of which have received the highest accolades, if you will, from the commentators, from the scriptures. And one of those is Hezekiah, and one is Josiah. But Josiah really gets the top of the top. Now, all of these kings were flawed. Hezekiah was a flawed man. Josiah was flawed as well, made a very critical mistake that cost him his life towards the end of his reign. Yeah, well, that's right. That's a bit of a silly redundancy there. He made a critical mistake that cost him his life. Nevertheless, Josiah did really great things. So we're going to flip over to the fulfillment of this prophecy here in 2 Kings 23, which is about 300 years after this first incident that took place. Amazing. See, God knows the future. He prophesied even the coming of this king by name. So come with me over here to 2 Kings 23. I'll flip back to this screen. And here we go. So this is Josiah's reforms. Now let's see here. There's a lot going on in this passage, perhaps if you read it on your own, rather than us taking the time here, because I just want to get to this fulfillment of this prophecy here. Moreover, the altar at Bethel, so we just read about that, the high place erected by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, that altar with the high place he pulled it down and burned, reducing it to dust. He also burned the Asherah. And as Josiah turned, he saw the tombs there on the mount, and he sent and took the bones out of the tombs and burned them on the altar and defiled it. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that what the man of God said? According to the word of the Lord that the man of God proclaimed, who had predicted these things. Then he said, what is that monument that I see? And the men of the city told him, it is the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and predicted these things that you have done against the altar at Bethel. And he said, let him be. Let no man move his bones. So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet who came out of Samaria. And Josiah removed all the shrines also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which kings of Israel had made, provoking the Lord to anger. He did to them, which Israel had made, provoking the Lord to anger. He did to them according to all that he had done at Bethel. And he sacrificed all the priests of the high places who were there on the altars and burned human bones on them. Then he returned to Jerusalem. And the king commanded all the people to pass over to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. For no such Passover has been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel, or during all the days of the kings of Israel or the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of the king of Josiah, this Passover was kept to the Lord in Jerusalem. Moreover, and this is kind of interesting here, that what it says about Josiah. And so now I'll read this. This is really interesting, the moreover bit. Moreover, Josiah put away the mediums and the necromancers and the household gods and the idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and Jerusalem, that he might establish the words of the law that were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. Still the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of the provocations of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And so that's probably as far as I'm going to read on this one today. You can go and read the entire section. What's my time like? Pretty good. So Josiah here is his life fulfills the prophecy made by the man of God. The man of God said, someone named Josiah is going to come. He's going to destroy this altar. He's going to burn the bones of your prophet, of your priests on it. Now, what is fascinating to me is that no other king destroys this altar. It's left until Josiah. Not even Hezekiah does. And it survives this whole time. I'm not sure that it was still operating at the time. Don't know. I'll find out. And I'm sure I'm going to do a supplement to this one, because the topic has just really enthralled me. But Josiah does these things. Now, you'll note what it says about Josiah and his greatness and all of this wonderful stuff that's going on in his life. And he, of course, is the last good king, I would say that, before the Babylonian captivity. Now, Josiah's son was wicked. This is also really, really interesting. This comes back to something that you can kind of think about when you read this passage, about Josiah particularly. Even though the nation started to keep the Passover in a way that God had commanded, it had not been kept that way since the days of the judges, Josiah said. So, wow, even before the kings, even David didn't restore it properly, or Hezekiah didn't restore it properly. None of the other good kings did. Josiah said it's being kept this way. He did that. He restored the sacrifices. He restored the temple order. He did all of that. God's wrath still remained. This is a vexing problem, but I'm going to offer the Al solution to this. This. It's only mine. It's only my theory, but I think it makes sense. Even though Josiah changed the nation in terms of its celebrations and restored this order that God wanted, the kind of sacrifices and the kind of temple services and so on, and he got rid of all of the idols and all of the false gods, it does not necessarily follow that the people by and large were with him in this. More than likely, the people were, I'm going to suggest, this is Al's suggestion, remained wicked, even though Josiah brought changes. The changes followed God's order for the nation, for sure, but the people remained wicked. And I think this explains why Josiah's son was wicked, and why the nation would just fall into wickedness straight away. I'm going to guess that, and this is just a guess, that had the entire nation, from the bottom of their hearts, the majority of households, all said, we have sinned, we've followed idols, we've done terrible things. Have mercy on us, O Lord, that possibly the judgments against Manasseh may have been lifted. And you'll even notice, if you go back to the Manasseh that's referenced, we've talked about this on this channel, Manasseh himself repented at the end of his life, but the problems had already been there, and the nation was already wicked in itself overall. So this is just totally fascinating to me, at least, ladies and gentlemen. If you do not know these stories, let me give you the references again. Start in 1 Kings chapter 12 and 13. Then you'll meet the wickedness of Jeroboam, who was the king of the northern nations. And you'll also see that God worked a miracle on his behalf, a couple, and he still did not listen. Be careful, ladies and gentlemen. Be careful. You might say, oh, if God does this for me, I will. Be careful. Probably you won't, even though he might. And Jeroboam continues in his wickedness. You'll notice at this time that God demonstrates his above timeness by sending a man with a word that is fulfilled 300 years later, even to the detail of the name of the one who fulfills that prophecy, Josiah, which is interesting. You get to Josiah's day, this altar has stood for all this time. Whether it's active or not, I don't know. Probably was. Josiah destroys it. He digs up the bodies of the priests over the years that were burned in that died in its service, and burns those bones on the altar. He leaves as a monument the grave of this man of God. Now, that's an interesting story as well. So really, really fascinating. This is a picture. This little story to me is a picture of God's timelessness, God's holiness, God's wrath and his justice, the failure of human nature, and a good lesson to you and I not to let our hearts get hardened, because it's a very, very easy place to go. My name is Al Persohn. Thank you for joining me. Have a read of those really, really interesting chapters, and maybe I'll get back onto my topic again next week. This has been Jeroboam's Withered Hand. How did I miss this?